Hello, everybody, and welcome. It's lovely to see so many of you from across the globe joining us. My name is Tamsin Rose, and I'm the moderator of this webinar. We've got some great speakers who've lined up, and they're going to help us to answer the question, how can patients engage in heart health research? But before we get started, just a few housekeeping points. We have automated language options available in 35 languages. You just need to press the caption button that you'll see below on the bottom of your menu. And this event is being recorded so we can share it with those who are unable to watch it live. Before we get into the content, let me invite Olive Fenton from the Global Heart Hub to join me. Hi, Olive.
Hello.
So, for those of us who today who are perhaps new to the Global Heart Hub, can you tell us just a little bit about the organisation?
Absolutely. Global Heart Hub is an alliance of over 150 patient organisations representing 2.5 million patients and carers worldwide. We work to provide a unified voice for people affected by heart disease and to promote genuine patient engagement across all aspects of cardiovascular health.
Thank you. So I think that explains why Global Heart Hub is interested in patient engagement in heart health research.
Yes, well, we know that patient involvement in clinical research leads to better treatments and improved outcomes for patients. However, globally, cardiovascular patients don't really hear about heart health research, and therefore they don't think it's something that they could participate in. So, as a result, trial centres struggle to recruit patients into trials, and in parallel, investment in cardiovascular research is going down year on year, and that's bad news for patients. And we at Global Heart Hub think that that needs to change. We're currently involved or already involved in a number of initiatives to improve better patient engagement. So, an example would be the EU funded READY project, which is trying to find solutions to the underrepresentation of certain populations in clinical research. So, the Global Heart Hub clinical trial search engine and the clinical research information web pages that we're introducing today are the next step in our mission to ensure that patient voices are heard in heart health research.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Olive. And this, of course, is part of the resources that we'll be telling people about later that we're making available to patients around the world. In this webinar, we are going to find out what clinical trials are, and we'll hear about the lived experience of two patients who've participated in clinical trials. And we'll understand more about the systems that are put in place to ensure the safety of patients in clinical trials. So let's get started. I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker. That's Krystina Lewis, who's an Associate Professor of Nursing from the University of Ottawa. Krystina will explain what clinical trials are, how they're designed, and why it's so important that people participate. Krystina, lovely to see you. Let me pass you the floor.
Great. Thank you very much, Tamsin, for the introduction. And I will share my screen here. Excellent. So I'm delighted to join this conversation and have the opportunity to present to you what are clinical trials from concept to concept and what every potential participant should know. So first, let's begin with the essentials. A clinical trial is a carefully planned research study that involves people. Its purpose is to answer specific questions about health-related interventions. So basically to find out how well it works and whether it's safe. Now, when we say intervention, we mean a therapy or a treatment. And on the next slide, I'll share some examples of what these can be. And one of the strongest ways to test an intervention is through a randomized clinical trial. These are considered the gold standard because they help us get the most reliable evidence about whether or not that intervention works and its safety, etc. And in these clinical trials, participants are assigned to different groups by chance, which we call randomization, which helps make sure that the results are fair and unbiased and removes the human influence from the process of deciding who gets which treatment. So in these trials, the research teams can look at several different questions. Answers questions such as, is the intervention, does it work? Is it safe? Is it tolerated? Are there side effects? And does it actually help people, right? So that might mean, does it help improve or cure a disease? Is it helping people live longer? And does it help people feel better? So let's talk about health interventions that can be studied in clinical trials. While we often think about clinical trials as being done to test new medications, they can also test new medical devices, new procedures, new surgical approaches. Yet clinical trials are not always researching drug treatments or medications. Some trials focus on the impacts of exercise or physical therapy and diets and other non-invasive type treatments. The interventions that are studied in clinical trials can range from being very experimental, where we really don't know a whole lot about that intervention and how it might work in people. But other trials also test interventions where they're already commonly used by people, but more evidence is needed about how they work and also with whom they work. And so why are they done? Clinical trials are done to provide research data or evidence about those interventions that are being tested, and that evidence can help decide what therapies or what other interventions might work best for people. And these results that come from clinical trials are used in many different ways and by many different groups. So with very new or very experimental therapies, those clinical trials can provide information about its safety and inform decisions about whether to keep testing it. Also, clinical trials results can be used by companies as they're developing new therapies, by doctors and other healthcare professionals who are making decisions with their patients in their day-to-day practice, by regulatory agencies to decide which drugs and devices are safe and effective for people. And also when we think about, policymakers who are deciding about where healthcare resources and healthcare dollars ought to be allocated. Now, there are different types or designs for clinical trials, and the design will depend on many things, including what's already known about the intervention and what questions need to be answered. So in phase 1 trials, these ones can often be called first in humans because it's usually the first time that intervention is being tested in people. And these trials aim to establish the safety, the dosage of the intervention in a very small number of participants, usually about 20 to 80. In phase 2 trials, these ones aim to ensure that the intervention is doing what it is supposed to do and to determine whether the dose should be changed, what that optimal dosage is, and continue to learn about those potential side effects. And this phase is carried out in a larger number of participants, usually about 100 to 300 people. In phase 3 trials, so known as confirmation trials, these are large-scale testing trials and often can look at how long the effects of an intervention can last and continues to learn about the effect of the intervention on the people. Now, there are even larger number of participants in this phase, usually hundreds, if not thousands of people. And in phase 4 trials, these are called post-marketing surveillance trials because they involve monitoring that intervention after that it's been launched onto the market. And so in these phase, teams study the long-term effects, perhaps uncover some of those rare adverse effects on a very large group of people and its use in the real world. Now, clinical trials are carefully designed and planned to first make sure that risks to the people who are participating in those trials are minimized as much as possible. And second, to make sure that the question is being asked can actually be answered once that trial is done. So let me walk you through the basic journey of how a clinical trial can come to life. So in that top left-hand box is the first step, and that's the one where it starts with the research question. And so the research team, which can include researchers, doctors, scientists, statisticians, and increasingly patient and caregiver partners, are first asking what they want to learn or what problem they hope to solve. And once that's clear, they create a very detailed plan, which they call a protocol, which lays out exactly how that trial is going to be run. Next, the team chooses the type of trial design that best answers their question, and then they decide who can safely participate, paying attention to criteria like age, their health condition, their medical history, and overall health. After that, they must calculate the number of people that they need to enroll in this trial in order to get the trustworthy results. Then the team plans that intervention, what is being tested that they're wanting to test, and then determine what's the other group, the control group, what are they going to receive for comparison. Then they must decide what the specific outcomes they're going to measure to know whether the intervention actually works. But before anything begins, this whole plan must go through strict ethics and safety reviews to protect the participants. And it's only after those approvals are obtained that researchers can recruit people and randomly assign them to those groups. So once the participants are enrolled, the study begins and the team closely monitors everyone's safety throughout. And once the trial ends, the data is analyzed and to see what the results show. And then they report the findings to regulators to help improve medical care for everyone. And so this whole process really ensures that new treatments are tested carefully in an ethical manner and also in a very scientifically rigorous way before the results reach the public. So an example of a clinical trial that you may be interested in checking out is that of the People's Trial. This was a public-led research initiative based out of the University of Galway, Ireland, that aimed to educate the public, especially people with no scientific background, about the process of a clinical trial by letting the public design and run a real one from start to finish. And so instead of researchers deciding the question, the public chose it, which was focused on whether reading a book in bed makes a difference to sleep in comparison to not reading one. So over 3,000 members of the public from 72 countries participated in the various phases of this trial, including choosing the question, the outcomes, and then, understanding the importance of the various steps in trials. And so throughout this process, they could see the care and the structure that's required to run a trustworthy trial. So I'm sharing this with you just to show how clinical research can be made accessible, enjoyable, and empowering. And I'm going to keep you in suspense as to whether or not reading a book in bed makes a difference to sleep, but I invite you to check out the website for the results and more information about these trials. And so when we're all understanding how trials work, we're all better equipped to make better informed health decisions and appreciate how taking part in clinical research can really make a difference. And participating in a clinical trial can make a difference. They're how we find out whether new medications work, whether new vaccines prevent illness, whether new devices or procedures are safe or more effective, and whether new health interventions can offer better quality of life or better healthcare experiences. And clinical trials can even, they help the participants directly by perhaps providing access to treatments that they might not otherwise have access to. They also help future patients by generating new evidence that leads to better care for everyone. And then also helps the doctors and the scientists and other healthcare professionals answer really important questions. So just a final note, whether you are thinking of participating in a clinical trial, please note that it is always voluntary. It is your individual choice, and you'll need to decide whether or not it is right for you. And a key part of that informed process is a document called the consent form. And that document should provide all of the relevant information about the trial and written in a way that's understandable to you. Should also be given enough time to read it and ask any of the questions that you might have. And also keeping in mind that informed consent is an ongoing process throughout a clinical trial, and you can withdraw your consent to participate at any time. So, and people often wonder whether they can say no to participating to a clinical trial if their healthcare provider offers them the opportunity to participate in one. And the answer is you can say no to a clinical trial if you don't feel that that's the right choice for you. But your relationship with your healthcare provider should not change in any way, whether you decide to participate or not. So I will leave it at that for now and hand it back over to Tamsin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Krystina. That was really helpful to understand all of the different steps and the type of things that clinical investigations and particularly clinical trials are used for. I've got a couple of questions for you. The first one is the biggie, that many people are frightened that they'll be treated as a guinea pig in a clinical trial. Where does this fear come from and how do we address it?
That's a great question. And I think it's completely normal for people to worry about being treated like a guinea pig in a clinical trial. We often hear that this can be a significant concern for many. And I think there are a few different reasons for these misconceptions. I think in honesty there's some painful history in here, right? There were some unethical studies many decades ago that that did violate people's trust. And fortunately, that is no longer the case. There is, in these modern trials now, fortunately, there's quite a bit of oversight that is involved. Institutional review guidelines, independent safety monitoring committees, informed consent, and these phased trials that begin only after significant preclinical safety data. And so I think important ways to address those misconceptions is to emphasize that people do have the choice, right? An individual person is in charge and they do have the right to say yes or no to participating, and knowing that they can leave the study at any time if they learn new information about the trial that isn't quite right for them in that moment. Also, the importance of explaining the strong safety layers that are in place nowadays. And I think viewing the whole clinical trial process as a teamwork, right? There's the research team who's designed the study and is conducting it, but the participants are truly partners in this as well, and would not be possible without their participation. And so everyone is really working towards that common shared goal of wanting to answer this question for future patients encountering that particular situation.
Great, thank you very much, Krystina. We could talk for the whole rest of the webinar because there's lots of ideas, and I've noticed we've started already to get some questions. So I'll keep those questions for later if you don't mind. But thank you, and your presentation really set up our conversation nicely. So now let me pass to our lived experience, and I'm going to introduce you to two patients. So let me start by introducing you to John Borrajo, who lives in the UK, and he's a retired veterinary surgeon. He was born with a bicuspid aortic valve, although he didn't know about it until he went into atrial fibrillation during a 600-kilometre bike ride in 2018. He was told that he would need to have a new heart valve, but that surgery would not be offered until he showed clinical signs such as dizziness or collapse. By 2022, the blood flow to his heart was severely reduced through stenosis. So, John, take us through this. What was the effect on you and also on your wife?
From a clinical perspective, I think during the years from the abnormality first becoming apparent, which was 2018, through to the time of surgery, which was 2023, I guess from a symptom point of view, breathlessness, that wasn't really a feature. I think tiredness was the slowly increasing feature. Apart from that, I had no other symptoms. Both myself but I think particularly my wife found it stressful because I think we were waiting for further symptoms, particularly dizziness and collapse, to start becoming a feature. And so that caused some anxiety. Because
Yes.
life was continuing as normal in that I was out and about and driving and one thing and another. So I guess you're waiting for something to come upon you.
Okay, so you were then invited to participate in a clinical trial. So can you tell us a little bit, what did that participation involve and what was the outcome for you?
Yes. Early in 2023, I was given the option of joining a clinical trial called the EASY-AS trial, which was being organised, I think, through researchers from Sheffield University, although I was based in Leicester and the hospital I was at was in Leicester. And the clinical trial was to see whether early surgical intervention with patients with aortic stenosis would be beneficial in the long term. Once I'd had a diagnosis of an abnormal aortic heart valve, which was moderately stenosed back in 2018, my cardiologist told me that I would need a new heart valve at some stage, assuming that I lived a normal lifespan. By 2022, it had become severely stenosed. So the amount of blood coming through the valve was greatly reduced, although it was very adequate for me. I was still functioning pretty well normally, except for getting tired. But it became an option for me to join the trial in 2023, which I was pleased to do. I went for that straight away, and as part of the trial, then it became to the point where I was randomized into two groups, either early intervention or more conservatively, just remain until symptoms start and then go for surgery. And I fell into the early intervention group, which I was pleased to have done, and had my surgery in September of 2023, which was very successful, and it's been good for me.
Great, thank you. That was really helpful. And in a few minutes, we'll have a panel with you and our other patient advocate to ask a few more questions. But let me welcome on board now Rhonda Monroe, who lives in the USA, and she is the CEO of the patient advocacy organization Boost. Now, Rhonda, you have overcome 5 coronary artery dissections, 3 heart attacks, 2 strokes, congestive heart failure, 3 defibrillator implants, a hematoma evacuation, a failed quadruple bypass surgery, failed stents, repeat bypass surgery, and much more. So you are the ultimate survivor. And in the midst of all of these many things, you participated in 3 clinical trials. The first was a trial for a new stent. The second was studying a new medication for liver disease, and the third was to test a new type of MRI scan. So again, you're very experienced for us. Can you tell us the first trial? What was the outcome of the first trial for you?
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today. Clinical research is literally near and dear to my heart, and I'm so happy to join the Global Heart Hub for this important initiative. The first trial that I joined was a trial for a stent to revascularize my heart. I had undergone a quadruple bypass, and the bypass graft shut down. I was having pain. And so the initial thought was to give me a stent to revascularize the vessel. And it was a clinical trial. I was offered that. I accepted. Unfortunately, it did not work. And the stent, I ended up being removed from the trial and undergoing another bypass surgery, but I was willing to try.
Thank you. So the first you were willing to try. The first trial didn't go particularly well for you, and yet you went on to participate in 2 more trials. Take us
I
through your
did.
thinking.
I did. So if at first you don't succeed, try again. And so the first one didn't work, but no harm, no foul. It was a progressive path to my healing. And so the stent was the path of least resistance. So we tried that first. And when it didn't work, it didn't deter me. It was just, we'll try this. And if not, we still have other options for you to be healed. So it didn't turn me away from clinical trials. And the next opportunity I had was for my liver. My liver was failing. And I was basically given a really poor prognosis, something that I was already familiar with because you shared my health conditions in the beginning, introducing me. And so I was given a really poor prognosis and told that my liver would fail and that I would ultimately succumb to liver failure or liver cancer, which was the wrong answer. And so I began to do my own research. I got online. I found a hepatologist 3 hours away from where I was residing at the time, and I went to visit him. And he looked at my liver, he looked at my enzymes, my labs, all of that, and he said to me, "Well, based on how you overcame your heart challenges, I will be willing to take a chance on you. I'm having a clinical trial that's going to start in the next month. The problem is, it's 5 hours away from where you live." Well, that wasn't a problem for me at all because a poor prognosis, death, or moving 5 hours away for a clinical trial. And so I chose the latter.
Okay. Well, I mean, you've described really nicely how patients can be very proactive in seeking different treatment options and the kinds of dialogues that you have with a healthcare provider, because it's, you jointly have to decide if this is the right thing for you. Can you just tell us about the third trial, how you got involved in that, and what was the outcome for you?
So the third trial was a no-brainer because the second one, which was a big deal, had a favorable outcome, and I was cured. And so when the opportunity for the third trial came, which was a diagnostic trial, it was for an MRI for patients with devices. And I had a cardiac device. And so MRIs, because of the metal, you can't do, but there was a clinical trial for a diagnostic mammogram. And so that was a no-brainer. As I said, I obviously, yes, I'm going to take the opportunity to participate, and that one went well also.
Excellent, thank you. Let me bring John back in and I'll ask both of you a couple of questions if I can. So, first of all, let me ask you what were the benefits to you of participating in a clinical trial? John, what was the outcome for you in terms of what was different?
Well, the main thing was that I had earlier surgical intervention than I would have had otherwise. As because I was on the trial, I did have some additional scans, I think, afterwards, particularly after the surgery. I think most of the stuff I had before the surgery I would have had anyway, but I think they possibly followed me up a bit more thoroughly, so they could get more data for the trial than they would have needed just from a clinical perspective.
Thank you, that's helpful. And Rhonda, was that also your experience that if you're in a trial, you get much closer monitoring, much more follow-up, and much more intense engagement by healthcare providers?
Exactly. I would echo what John said about the close following. And then for a longer period of time, you're not left alone after the intervention, but there is a substantial follow-up over time. And that's significant because in healthcare today, it's sometimes hard to get an appointment. But when you're in a clinical trial, you know that there are going to be regular repeat follow up over time. And so that is an added benefit. And for me, I also benefited from the relationship with that provider. They went on to help me in another area simply because I had participated in the clinical trial. I mentioned something else that was bothering me, and they referred me in network to their center, and I was able to get in immediately to see someone based on my relationship with that provider. And so it had additional benefits as well.
Thank you. Let me ask you both. Krystina explained that, clinical trials look at individual treatments, but they're also about building general knowledge so that also we're moving science forward. When you were thinking about whether to join a trial, did you consider the wider societal benefits beyond just what might happen for you? Was that a factor for you? John?
I don't think it was. I guess it should have been from a decent sort of person point of view, but I think it is a factor now, because clinical trials undoubtedly are absolutely vital, if we're taking medicine forward. So it is something definitely worthwhile considering. But in all honesty, I'm not sure that I took other factors than my own well-being into account when I decided for the trial.
Yes, of course. And you mentioned earlier the impact and stress on your wife and
Yeah,
family. So there
yeah,
is the sort of the immediate surroundings that you also thought of.
yes.
Rhonda, let me ask you a question. We've got people joining us from, and I've just counted from the people who put in the chat, we've got 12 different countries already watching us. So what would you say to someone who's watching this webinar, so they're curious about clinical research, but they've never considered participating in a clinical trial? What's your advice to them?
Consider it. It can be absolutely life-saving and life-changing, but not just for you, for future generations. Part of what happened to me was because there was a lack of evidence in women and minorities. And so my untimely demise or near demise was because there was no body of evidence that was generalizable to someone like me. And so it's important to consider there is no pressure, as Krystina presented. It's voluntary and you can always withdraw, but it is a worthwhile consideration, not just for yourself, but for your loved ones, for your children, and for the community at large. And so I would recommend explore it. Let it be an option. Every opportunity may not be the right one for you, but it is a worthwhile consideration.
Thank you. I think that's a really important message because, cardiovascular disease is the number one killer of women. It's the number one cause of death. And yet, women are only 40% of clinical trial recipients in cardiology. So there's a big gap, as you say, in women, and even more so from people from different ethnic minorities. So I think this is really key, that part of building our knowledge is understanding all of that. So thank you both for sharing your perspectives and your viewpoints. John, would you also like to say, what would you say to someone who's watched you and heard a little bit about you and is considering themselves for a clinical trial?
Well, yes, like Rhonda, I would say definitely consider it very seriously. Consider the pros and the cons and the risks. But I would, consider it and be positive towards it because, generally speaking, it is going to be a good thing to take part in and good for you and good for others as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Rhonda and John, for joining us and sharing your lived experience. It's so important to have the patient experience put right at the heart of our conversation about clinical research, because I've been looking at the questions, and a lot of the questions that have come in have been, how do we put patients more centrally in this process? And I think you've demonstrated that really nicely for both of us. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Let's now move to the next section of the conversation, which is we heard about right at the beginning. Krystina said that the thing that authorities want to do is every clinical trial or clinical investigation has to be authorized and it has to be safe. So let me introduce Alexandra Poulsson, who's a senior advisor from the Norwegian Institute of Public Health. And Alexandra is going to help us understand how patient safety is safeguarded in clinical research. So welcome, Alexandra. You work in one of the institutions that are part of the sort of national authority frameworks that look at safety and efficacy of medical devices and medicines. So, help us to understand, how do authorities go about this? We saw that from Krystina. There are lots of steps, and in each step, issues like, safety or ethics or informed consent are thought about. So can you tell us from your side how it works?
Yes, and thank you for the kind introduction. And I have to say, it's been very interesting to hear the patients' perspectives. It's not so often we get to hear them, so it's very nice to actually hear that what we work with on a daily basis actually has use somewhere. So I'm just showing you now. I hope you can see my screen. This looks like a mess, but it isn't. This is the authorities that exist in the European picture for clinical investigations. And in Europe, we got the clinical trial regulation in 2022. And so this is weaving together how clinical trials are run in Europe now. And there's a lot more collaboration across Europe about clinical trials. And so you see here the big bubble is the European Commission. You see the European Medicines Agency. You see heads of medicines agencies, which are the national agencies, which is one of the places where I work, but I'm on the medical device side. And then you see the national competent authorities, and these are the ones that approve medical device trials. And you can also see that there's member state ethics committees. So all of these authorities work together to make sure that clinical trials are safe, because of course the ultimate goal for a clinical trial, clinical investigation is that medicines or medical devices should come onto the market to be used generally across all patients everywhere. And so this is very important that this is safeguarded. So the first level of safeguarding is, of course, that the medicine should be safe from a low-level perspective. So there's a lot of testing done in laboratories to make sure that this is safe. For medical devices, for example, for these stents that have been mentioned, they have to be able to work over a number of years. And so just testing them in a lab to make sure that nothing happens to them over a longer period of time is very important. And so this is where the regulatory authorities come in to make sure that all these things are in place before they enter into clinical trials. And so the next stage is then the clinical investigations, and here you also have the ethical aspects. So ethics committees across institutes and nations work to ensure safety, dignity, well-being, so protecting the participants, and this is worldwide. And so you then have the ethical aspects, the human rights. You think that this shouldn't be, it should be of course, human rights are kept in place, but this is an important aspect for the ethical committees. And so the integrity of the participants are prioritized over furthering science, because often as a scientist, you want to get the answers, but it shouldn't be to the detriment of patients. So they evaluate the ethics, the medicine, the science, that it is mature enough to go into a clinical investigation. They also look at privacy and personal data that's being shared to make sure it isn't an overstep towards the patient. And then it's the study design, the criteria for participation, benefit risks for the patient, that the benefits should outweigh the risks. But of course, in a clinical investigation, there are unknown unknowns. So there is no guarantee, but often there's no guarantee with medicines and medical devices. Anyway, there can be adverse events, and there will always be adverse events with serious high-risk devices. And then there's the recruitment process. How is this done? As Krystina said, you shouldn't be forced into this. This is a voluntary process. And it's also voluntary from the perspective that if you've signed up to it, but then suddenly you get cold feet and you decide this isn't for you, you can withdraw at any time. And you don't need to make any excuses for why you're withdrawing. That is your personal choice. And then there's the informed consent process, the impartiality of those running the clinical investigation, that there should be transparency in who's involved, where the money is coming from, these type of things. And the study site should have competent people present. And at the bottom here, I've put some links in. And so you have the standards from ISO regarding clinical investigations. You've got good clinical practice guidance. You've got World Health Organization guidance. And then you've got the Helsinki ethical principles. So these are just some of the things that need to be in place for a clinical investigation to be run. And then there's the informed consent. And this is one of the important aspects, that the information should be given to the patients, potential participants in a trial, in a way that is understandable to them. It should be clear, and they should be allowed to discuss their concerns with a member of the investigating team who's appropriately qualified, but also then qualified in a way to speak in layman's terms. They should be able to, in all honesty, dumb it down or lift it up, depending on who they're speaking to. And here we had John, who's a vet, who has more of a clinical background, will understand more. And then you have other people who will not understand technical details. And then around this, there's the procedure that is to be done has to be described in complete detail. The benefits, the implications, the risks, even the inconveniences should be described to you. So the little things that will change things in your daily life if you participate in the trial. And so the rights and protections, as we've said, we've emphasized that it's voluntary, but also, as Krystina said, that the informed consent is throughout the period. So new safety information should be made available to you, and clinical investigation results should be made available to you. And then the duration, the treatment alternatives, follow-up, and also, of course, unfortunately, if there is an adverse event that harms you, damage compensation. So all of these things should be explained in the informed consent. So that's me.
Yeah. That's great. That's really helpful, Alexandra. And I'm getting lots of really good comments in the chat saying how much people have appreciated this explanation. Let me just ask you one question, which is, there are all of these different steps. When you're looking at the safety of the trials and, the ethical concerns, is the involvement of patients in helping to set the question or identify the outcomes of the research, is that part of what a regulator or national authority would look at? Is it nice to have, or is that considered essential?
From the ethics committee, it's considered essential to have laypersons, patient representatives, to evaluate the clinical investigation. From the perspective of the regulatory aspects, their patient involvement isn't so common, but you involve clinicians. And so the clinical experts you involve have experience with the pathology, with the other versions of the device, those aspects. But it's becoming more normal in research to want to involve the patients so that the outcomes that you're looking at in a clinical investigation are relevant to the patients.
Great, thank you very much. Now, we are going to be going to a Q&A session in just a few minutes with our panelists. You may remember that at the beginning, Olive mentioned that the Global Heart Hub has developed some resources to help people understand more about clinical research and to support them in looking for trials which might be of relevance to them or near where they live. So we are now going to show you a little video which tells you a little bit more about the resources that have been put together. So let's watch the video.
Living with heart disease can be challenging, but knowledge brings confidence and hope. Understanding clinical research helps you make informed choices about your care. It can open doors to new treatments and better quality of life. Since heart disease often runs in families, you could also be helping the next generation. That's why Global Heart Hub has launched a new patient-focused clinical research initiative, a simple, trustworthy tool that helps you explore cardiovascular trials happening near you. You can find out where they are happening and get tips on what to do if you want to find out more. You can learn what clinical trials are, what the benefits might be for getting involved, and what questions to ask to find out more. For example, let's say you have hypertension and you want to find clinical trials in the United States. You just type hypertension, choose your location, and the platform instantly shows you all the available studies. From there, you can explore, learn more, and dive into the details of the ones that interest you. Global Heart Hub's clinical trial portal is a trusted resource which will help you to find studies that might be relevant to you or to your loved ones, all in one reliable place. Using our clinical trial search engine might empower you to find a clinical trial matching your needs. Let's work together to improve trial awareness, because when patients are informed and involved, care improves. Your participation can shape a healthier future for yourself and for others. Visit clinicaltrials.globalhearthub.org to learn more.
So do make sure you go to the Global Heart Hub website to check out this and other resources that will be really helpful for you. And I know that talking to researchers that often their hardest challenge is, being able to recruit patients. So having this website where you can go in and find out what's happening near you and being able to recruit more patients will be fantastic. So thank you for this. Our wonderful panel is here to answer all our questions. We have Krystina, we have Alexandra, we have John, and we have Rhonda. and we have about 10 minutes where we can answer the questions that people have put forward. So please put your questions in the chat and we'll ask our panel to deal with them. A couple of questions have already come in a little bit earlier, and I might want to pick up on them. The first one I think is quite interesting is what is the value of patient engagement as part of the research team, and how important is that for eventual patient participation? I think Krystina, Alexandra, this is probably a question for you. And Rhonda as well. Okay, so the research team, so this isn't just the clinicians, these are the people who are perhaps in universities who are asking the initial question like, we need to know an answer to this. How important is it that we have patients at that stage and as a result then get better patient participation? Krystina, I see you ready to go, and Rhonda, I'm going to be coming to you.
Excellent, and I'm delighted that this question was asked, as increasingly in Canada in particular, where patient engagement on research teams is critical and often mandated for to receive funding. And the real value of there's multiple values in having patient partners as part of the research team, but I think is really being able to get that patient input early on all aspects of the protocol to ensure that informed consent documents are easily understandable and all of the relevant information is included in, to ensure that the logistics of the follow-ups that are included in the clinical trial is minimizes burden on the participants in terms of the logistics, and thinking about the potential financial burdens of being involved in clinical trials. And so having patient partners as part of the team, as also was mentioned earlier, is ensuring that whatever is being measured, determining the success of the intervention is truly something that is of relevant and matters to the patients.
Thank you. Rhonda.
It's crucial to have patients at the table when you're designing the question. Are you asking a question that matters to patients? Because medicine is not necessarily something, if you build it, they will come. Because there are products that have been built that patients just don't respond to, and they die out in the marketplace. And so when you're asking the question, the patient needs to be involved in that process. I sit on steering committees. I review designs of engineering designs. I look at prototypes. I am engaged in every facet of the research process. And so it's important to remember that patients aren't just patients, but they're people too, with education, with experience, who can really add value from a business perspective. I'll give you one example of a trial that someone came to and asked me about after the fact. The study was called HIS CRT. And Wilhelm His discovered his bundle branch block in the, not block, but bundle branch in the heart. No one knows that but doctors, right? You don't know who Wilhelm His is. And so it's called His CRT. And a year into the study, a researcher came up to me and said, why can't we recruit women? You named the study His CRT. Had a patient, so everyone in the club understands that, but there was no patient at the table. And when you're asking, what is the recruitment goal? What is the population you're targeting? How many men? How many women? Maybe we need to name it something else so that everyone sees, because gender is what comes up when you look at the name of the study. And so that's just one example of why the patient should be included from the onset and all the way through the process to post-market surveillance.
Thank you. I think that's very clear, and names are so important. Let me ask now, Alexandra, can I bring you in? Because we'd had a question saying, what happens if there are adverse effects? And somebody else says, how much do authorities look at the psychosocial risks and potential impacts of these things? So I think that probably sits on your desk to answer first.
Well, firstly, adverse events are very tightly monitored, so they have to be reported immediately. I think it's 48 hours is the minimum time to report these to national authorities. And these will then be investigated to see what has occurred. And this is one of the things that can happen, if we're talking about an implantable device, of course, there's a chance of infection. An infection may not be device related. So often it is a question of, is it device related or is it not device related? And then if you think of an innovative device, it could be procedure related because it's innovative. So the surgeon may have less experience performing the surgery. So that as well has an effect on how the outcomes are. So the authorities can choose to request a halt to a study if it is very serious, and they can request that it is stopped if it is very serious. So these are the things that the authorities monitor very closely. Regarding psychosocial aspects, I think this was what we were talking about, inconveniences that the ethics committee looks at. And this is very important. We talk about if a patient needs oxygen all the time and has to drag around an oxygen tank with them, that is a huge inconvenience. And how can we alleviate this? And so these type of things are important. Many aspects of disease hinder you socially. And if these little things can be improved, that's a very big thing for the patient themselves. And that's what I wanted to compliment Rhonda on as well, that sometimes having patients coming in and looking at the outcomes of a study, the patients are interested in incremental improvements to their lives. And they don't need the big improvement that we as researchers often try to go for. And so this is why the patient perspective is so important.
Thank you. Who else would like to comment on that before we go to the next question? I think the psychosocial sort of reality, the impacts and implications of being involved in a trial, the uncertainties, I think this might be worth reflecting on. Rhonda, you're nodding. Did you want to add something?
Well, in a number of the studies that I'm involved in, we engage a cardiac psychologist so that we can address the psychosocial aspects and include tools that measure them, not just patient-reported outcomes on how they feel, because quality of life certainly matters, but your mental health and your stress level is certainly part of that. And so when designing the study, at the protocol phase, we often engage especially for device studies. He spent the bulk of his career in devices. We engage someone, a clinical cardiac psychologist, who can help us address those issues when we're designing patient-facing materials, when we're talking about informed consents, when we're talking about adverse events. We consider that up front, which is something that is often patient prompted, the mental health aspect of it, and not necessarily research, not necessarily part of the initial research consideration, but very much matters to patients.
Thank you. John, are you able to share a little bit? You mentioned earlier that the stress of waiting to find when you might have to have surgery or not, that has an impact on you and your wife and your family. Can you give us a little bit more about the sort of the psychosocial impact and implications of being involved in the research? Because it wasn't just you who went through the research, your family had to accompany you as well on that journey.
Yeah, I think my wife particularly found the waiting for my heart valve to deteriorate to the point where I showed symptoms very trying. I guess which is understandable because she particularly would have had to pick up the pieces if I'd suddenly collapsed and had an issue, and we could have been anywhere. I think probably one's imagination runs away with you, and in practice it would have just been a lightheadedness, but your imagination runs away and you think you're going to be collapsing, stuck away from everywhere, and you won't be able to get help. And these sort of things. So she particularly was anxious. Yeah, there were implications from a stress perspective for her, and the trial coming as it did was very helpful.
Thank you, because I understand that the study actually included looking at the carer experience as well when they were thinking about, if we intervene earlier, what's the impact on the patient and the carer experience as well. So thank you, that's really helpful. We're coming towards the end of our time together, and I would like each of you to give sort of one piece of advice to our audience, because we've had a lot of people who are interested in this. Several people have said, okay, here's what needs to be improved, the informed consent materials so they're easier to understand, getting patients involved earlier. Some people have mentioned that one of the challenges is that at the sort of development of a trial, the patients who are involved in the patient advisory group don't get financially supported at that point. You might get financial compensation for being in a trial, but in that early stage of deciding and thinking, that part isn't played, and we need to get more patients involved in that advisory group function. So we've already had these comments in, but what would be the final message you'd like to leave everyone with? So Krystina, let me start with you. What's the final message to the audience?
Great conversation here today. Final message is to involve patients, from the beginning, as we discussed earlier today. I think that is really critical in order to increase participation in these critical trials in order to improve patient care. And as I saw in the comments that did come through, there are creative, innovative ways to be able to do new informed consent documents in ways that can really help engage and increase participation.
Thank you. John, last message for the audience.
So I think if you have an opportunity to take part in a trial, then definitely consider it very seriously. It's a million miles away from being a guinea pig and being experimented on. That's not the situation at all. The trials are there to hopefully take things forward, medicine forward, and they are set up in such a way that risks are minimized and you will be taken great care of. And so definitely I would very much encourage participation.
Great, thank you. Alexandra.
Thank you. I have to say, I echo what's already been said, but I think it's important as well as for patients to be proactive. If you're curious about your disease, you want to hear about trials, the website that's been given here is very useful. There's also to do with the clinical trial regulation. There's a map of clinical trials going on in Europe today, where you can see what's happening in your disease area, which is quite useful. And I think if you get approached about a clinical trial, then it's good to hear what they have to say. And it means that you can ask a lot of questions that you might not get from your GP. And understand more about your disease, what possibilities. One of the things I think I forgot to mention is you're supposed to be given information about alternatives. So what alternatives are out there for you if you don't get the intervention? What's the possibilities? And I think that's a very important thing for patients to learn more about their disease so that they can learn to handle it better.
Thank you. Rhonda, last word to patients always.
Research, it has come a long way over the last several decades, from funders and regulators mandating it to the level of patient engagement and the opportunities that exist on both sides of the table. I would say if you have an opportunity to explore research studies that may be beneficial to you, or to become a research partner on the research team, do your homework, know what matters for you and your family, and use it as a tool of empowerment. It's no longer that patients are guinea pigs. If you put in the time to understand the study, to understand the opportunity, you can take research and use it as an empowering tool to improve your health and the health of others.
Thank you so much, Rhonda, Krystina, John, and Alexandra. We've had loads of really positive comments in the chat. I know people have really appreciated this. And of course, an event like this would not be possible without the financial support of our sponsors who helped in the development of the clinical research resources of the Global Heart Hub and of this webinar. Thank you so much. You made today possible. And finally, let me just say we're so glad that you participated. And in the next hours or days, you will get an email from us, which is a survey. Please complete it. It helps us to improve the resources we're offering. And we'll also be sending out links to the recordings when they're available. So feel free to share that with as many people as possible. And please go to the Global Heart Hub website and have a look at the clinical research information pages and the clinical trial search portal. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. I hope you found it useful, inspiring. I hope you're curious to engage in clinical research in the future. Thank you all and goodbye.
Thank you.